Hello and welcome. I'm Julia Manchester, a political reporter at The Hill. I'm honored to be moderating this virtual event today by Changing America, an editorial section of The Hill. Since launching in the fall of 2019, Changing America has been devoted to telling powerful stories about climate change, diversity and inclusion, education, health, and more. Today's conversation couldn't be more timely. As we head into the holiday season, there is a lot to look forward to. Snowy nights, family traditions, and hearty meals. But for many in the United States, the holidays also mark the start of something less joyous, the onset of seasonal depression. While it's normal to experience the winter blues, many are affected more acutely during this time with disorders such as seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. About 1 in 20 people in the northern half of the United States experience more intense seasonal depression, and women are 4 times more likely to experience it than men. This year, after waves of the coronavirus have swept through the country and millions still have not returned to normal life, these problems will be even more acute. Today's discussion will explore the connection between the winter season and mental health, and our experts will speak about ways to make this time of year a more positive experience for all. I'd like to thank Changing America's presenting sponsor, Verizon, for its support of today's event. And before we get underway, here's a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag #ChangingAmerica. We're broadcasting live, and if you've experienced any trouble with the live stream, please refresh that page, and that should be a quick fix. Now, let's dive right in. Joining us today is Dr. Cristina Cipriano of the Yale Child Study Center within their School of Medicine. Michael Turman is the president of the Center for Environmental Therapeutics and seasonal affective disorder expert. And finally, we have Joe Portia Mayari, a conscious sex and relationship coach, as well as the co-host of Nothing Confidential podcast. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so just to start off with, and Cristina, I'll start with you. How has the pandemic shifted the way we talk and think about mental health in the United States? It seems that one of the silver linings of it is that it's really come to the forefront of a lot of healthcare discussions.
Absolutely. Prior to the pandemic, there were many of us who were working in the mental health space, and we were hoping for everyone's attention because you really want to be preventative. You want to be addressing our mental health and wellness before there is a need to do so. And the pandemic really pushed that conversation into the forefront, where now we are centering our children's school experiences and our lives around how we're feeling in this time and how we can manage those feelings to better support our ability to thrive through the compounding traumas and experiences that our families across the nation are still facing.
Right. And Michael, when we talk about the effects of mental health due to the pandemic, I mean, I was working from home for a big portion of the year last year. And, there were days when I honestly didn't want to get out of bed. And I talked to other colleagues and friends and family members, and they felt the same way. And as we approach the holiday season, or I should say the winter season, it seems like that's compounded by shorter days, colder weather, et cetera. How does this all impact mental health? I mean, why are we feeling it so much through work from home and, just living in the age of coronavirus?
Well, you stay at home and you're not getting natural outdoor light exposure in the same way. So two things are happening. The home is darker, but as this season comes in, the sun is rising later and later, and that's worse the farther north you go. And this all connects up to our biology, our circadian rhythms. We track that sunrise signal, and you're not going to get it if you're indoors all day. And in the winter, it's going to be later and later and later. These are physiological triggers for depressed mood, pure and simple.
Right. And Joe, would love to talk about the mental health pressures that come during the holiday season. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of pressure to be happy. It's a joyous time of year. There's beautiful colors everywhere, decorations. But oftentimes we still feel this underlying sadness, and for some people it's not so underlying. Talk about the pressure to really enjoy the holiday season that impacts the mental health of so many Americans and people around the world.
Yeah, what I'm seeing a lot is this pressure about just trying to be happy and this pressure of trying to perform. And it's been something that with a lot of my clients, what I'm seeing is this pressure is really kind of speaking to maybe some of the more childhood traumas that they may have experienced, from abandonment, loneliness, not feeling included. And a lot of that builds up internally, and it's things that we have a hard time expressing because there's so much of what we see on media or online of what the happy holidays are supposed to be, when really being able to find acceptance and also the sadness in that is part of the thing that can really help to balance or to bring harmony in some of these emotions.
Right. So we've talked about how the holiday season combined with the coronavirus pandemic is impacting mental health, maybe in a negative way. But how, I want to kind of switch gears to talk about how we can improve this. What are some of the mechanisms we can employ to get through these dark months of the end of the year, beginning of the year, and, somewhat tolerate or be able to enjoy the holiday season. Christina, would love to start with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So, to pick up on the theme that Joe brought up about one, validating those emotions, we were having those emotional experiences. We also need to reappraise them. So we need to think about our experiences with our world right now as an opportunity to evaluate it. And we often, as humans, we evaluate things as, good or bad, relevant or not relevant, threatening or not so threatening. So within that, in short, we have the power to be able to say, I'm not where I wanted to be right now for this holiday. I'm not spending it in, maybe a way that I was used to before, but I can reappraise and reevaluate the situation I'm in right now to find moments of gratitude, of things I can be thankful for, moments of joy in what has been, a very tumultuous year and a half and change for most of our nation. And so thinking about the way in which we can reappraise the situation to help to anchor in our control over it is intimately tied with our ability to then thrive.
Right. And Michael, this may seem a little trivial, but your comments about the natural light, the days getting shorter, it reminded me of a conversation I was having with a friend over text the other day. It was Monday night and it got dark at 5 p.m. And I texted her and I was like, I don't want to go outside. I don't want to do anything. I just want to lay on my couch and be lazy. I have no productivity. And she said, well, let me recommend you sun lamps. They really help me, especially as it gets colder, days get shorter, et cetera. How much, what other, tools can we use in addition to sun lamps to make it seem like, to make us be able to enjoy the day more and keep that productivity up?
Depression is an overriding factor here. One can will oneself to feel better and fight behaviorally, as the rest of you guys have described. But when depression hits, and that's for hundreds of thousands of people, you have to address that directly on top of willful change. And you say, what can we do besides increasing our light exposure? Well, that's the critical event. And it has to be done timed to your circadian cycle when you wake up. So if you're allowing yourself to sleep in, as so many people are during the pandemic, and you're shifting later, your mood is inevitably exacerbated, and it's going to be hard to willfully cheer up.
Right. And I mean, I'm definitely one of those people that has been sleeping in and waiting till the very last second to be able to roll out of bed and log on to work. So I completely understand that. Joe, going to you, we talked about the pressures of the holiday season to, feel like you have to be happy, you have to be in the spirit. But I feel like there's also pressure with the pandemic, with everything starting to open up, or knock on wood, hopefully opening up. That you have to be outside, you have to be with your friends. And that's a major shift after spending a lot of this inside with smaller groups of people. It's got to be intimidating for so many people to enter these social spaces with more than 10 people. Talk to us about, how this is impacting mental health and what people can do to prepare themselves for this shift in the social environment.
Yeah, I mean, it totally causes a chaos, right? Like it's a chaotic feeling to have to go from one change to another. And so one of the things I think can be useful for this is really sitting in and getting really deeply in tune with your intuition or your inner guidance or your inner wisdom. And oftentimes, by being in tune with yourself, you could really understand what your needs are. And so in preparing with these situations, being able to regulate your nervous system so that you're at a state of ease or at a state of flow will help to be able to step into these situations a little bit easier. And I also think too, with the pressures of all that, pull the pressure back and remove some of that and really kind of ask yourself, is this right for me? Rather than, is it right that I have to do this thing just because it's the holidays? And I think when you can really tap into your own inner guidance of that, then you can really figure out what actually feels good for you.
Michael, you brought up a really good point a minute ago about depression. And it seemed, and we touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the discussion, but it seems like before the pandemic, when we talked about depression, and maybe this was starting to change, but there was a stigma attached to it. But now that we're through much of the pandemic, or hopefully through a big portion of it, there's a lot, the conversation around mental health and depression seems to have been destigmatized. Have you been seeing this?
There's no question about it. You have to understand that depression exists on a calibrated scale, from mild blue mood, where you're pushing through and behaving normally, other people wouldn't even notice that anything's wrong, through the slowing down phase to the dysfunctional phase. And any individual can travel between these. So the idea is to find ways to come out of the extreme of this situation. And apart from the morning light boxes, which you mentioned, just being outdoors for half an hour a day can make a big difference. In Europe, they're now playing around with the notion of holding class outdoors, not indoors. And they're seeing a whole change of group dynamic and learning enhancement and increased socialization when you have your class outside.
Yeah, I went to college in upstate New York, and I'm telling you, whenever it was spring outside or a nice fall day and we had class outside, it seemed like everyone was more productive and happy. Christina, as we approach the holiday season and things start to open up, we're going to obviously be in more contact with friends and family. And obviously, we're not the only ones dealing with depression or, mental health issues. How can you approach a family member, or if a family member or a friend approaches you about a mental health struggle they're dealing with, what's the best course of action on that? Because this is still a topic that seems to have a stigma attached to it, and I don't think a lot of people know exactly how to approach it in a personal situation.
Absolutely. So first, you want to start by validating those feelings and really thanking and acknowledging the bravery that it took of the other person, the other family member, friend, peer, child, teacher, leader in your community who is opening up to you about, their experiences as well. And we want to ground that in our common humanity, that we all have been having challenges of varied levels, right? We were having them pre-pandemic and we've experienced them at scale throughout, but they still continue to be deeper and more abrasive for some communities and for some of us more than others. And so acknowledging their feelings and validating and thanking them for sharing them with you is a first step toward holding that safe space together. A second point that I'll note is that it's really about co-regulation of yourself in the environment with others. And so if you're that person they open up to, you want to be an authentic expressor and communicator, to be there to hear and feel with that individual by engaging in deep empathy and conversation to support them through it. So it's not enough to say, well, thank you for telling me, but rather say, well, how can I support you? What resources can I support you with, with accessing? And can I accompany you to an appointment, to a list? Can I send you a link, right? Because when we're feeling experiences of despair, of frustration, of high anxiety, it impedes our ability to function. And even the idea of simply looking up links or, the doctor's phone number, right? Going to an appointment, right? These are huge steps off a cliff right? When you're in it, when you're feeling it. And so being a partner and being there for someone to help them through it is going to be a great step forward.
Yeah, that's some great advice. Joe, moving on to another topic, and a topic I know pretty well as a political reporter, dealing with mental health and the political climate. It's obviously tough, to say the least. A lot of us living in Washington oftentimes have to tune it out for a little bit on a daily basis just for our own mental sanity. But this seems to be impacting Americans across the country because it seems like much of the news media is covering primarily politics now. It seems either politics or the coronavirus, and those are obviously pretty big, heavy discussions. And as we approach Thanksgiving, I'm sure politics could end up being a topic of conversation, a contentious one at many dinner tables. How have you been seeing politics in this political climate impact the mental health of individuals, but families as well?
Oh my God, it has been impacting so many different relationships because it brings up areas of conflict for a lot of people, different beliefs, different point of views on it. And it's been one that I have seen have divided families. I've also seen, situations where even partners are not speaking to each other based on their different political views. And so I think one of the ways that maybe we can approach this is with a little bit of grace during the holidays, and also to maybe reserve those conversations and to create a container where whatever the conversation of topic might be, or even let's say a political conversation, maybe that could be suspended and be reserved for a certain period of time and held space for a certain period of time, so it's not the center of attention or even a side dish at someone else's Thanksgiving dinner.
Right. And Christina, I'd love to talk about the conversation of children and mental health. We often talk about parents having to, work two jobs or multiple jobs in a way during the pandemic, whether it's teaching their children through virtual school and at the same time doing their own jobs. But for kids and growing up during the pandemic, that's had to have had such a profound impact, not only on their own education, but how they've processed all of this. How has the pandemic impacted the mental health of children under 18? And how do we expect, how has the learning process, how we pay attention to mental health in kids changed since the pandemic?
Absolutely. In thinking about kids, I want to first just go back to a comment that my colleagues made earlier about the, sleeping in and like getting up at the last possible minute. And my first thought as a parent of 4 young children was, that sounds lovely. I would love to get to be sleeping in, because our kids, they're still going, right? No matter what. And even if it was online, it was different things to prep for. So just wanted to acknowledge that as a mom with young ones. And so when we look at the experiences that our children have had over the past 20 months and counting now, I mean, they're watching their adults around them process these novel and traumatic events in healthy and unhealthy ways, right? And at the same time, they're watching their trusted teachers and their routines as they once know it get turned on their heads, and they are needing to adapt. And in many ways, our children are actually better at adapting, right? Our younger children are better at adapting because they've had less routine than, and they're more flexible than we are as their adults. But at the end of the day, with the impact and the psychosocial impact of this pandemic and this experience, the interruptions of learning, the disruptions in their flow, the losses of life that these children may have experienced or continue to experience over time, we're really not seeing it yet. We're not going to see the full impact as of right now. This isn't something that, we could say, oh, it's over, or the vaccine, is rolling out, and so it's over. But rather, we're likely to see the ripple of impact on children's mental health for years and, potentially a generation to come. But what we are seeing in the short term is that, rates of anxiety and depression, particularly among our adolescent populations, are at an all-time high in reports. And, many are feeling disconnected with school, a lack of belonging and safety, as well as having had that experience of, watching our world come to grips with a novel pandemic, a novel virus, and the compounding racial traumas of the past year and a half.
Right, and I want to dig deeper onto a point you made, the loss of life there, because talking to friends and colleagues, especially in journalism where we report about it so much, unfortunately, sometimes when you're talking about it, it almost seems like you're reporting a number, and you're not talking about the people who have actually lost their lives. Do you think that there's going to be a bit of a delayed reaction among adults and children when it comes to talking about the awful, loss of life that we've seen during this pandemic? It seems like so many people, including myself, haven't been able to process it because it seems like there's this force in our society, especially in American culture, I would say, that tells us, okay, keep going, keep calm, carry on. Do you foresee us one day just hitting someone straight in the face and saying, wow, this happened?
I certainly hope that that's not the case. I hope that we as a society can come to terms with our loss as a collective, and it also normalizes the life course and our discussions of it with our children and families as we've had these experiences, at broader scale, while also acknowledging that some families and some communities have been struck by loss of life, loss of wages, loss of income, loss of security rate, at much greater scale than others. And so thinking about ways in which we as a nation can work together to create safe spaces to heal and to go back to an earlier comment, remove the stigma that may be associated with grief that comes with those losses. So I'll leave that there for now. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. And Michael, I'm going to shift to a less dark topic, maybe metaphorically, and talk about daylight savings time, sort of a dark topic still. There's a debate in Washington, and we see this debate every year. There's a lawmaker that comes forward. I think it was Washington Senator Patty Murray last week, who was really railing on the Senate floor, going against daylight savings time, calling it for it to be abolished in some way, I believe, or changed. Do you think that without daylight savings time, we'd be able to fix or alleviate some of the impacts of seasonal depression?
Yes, for sure. We're jogging the circadian rhythm back and forth in a very aggressive way when we switch the time an hour forward or an hour back. It's actually harder to adjust physiologically with the springtime shift than with the shift we've just had. But all of these, there are medical sequelae, the accident rate goes up, and there are mood sequelae that can last for weeks. So at this point, the sequence will feed in to the emergence of the winter depression, for example.
Right.
So, yeah, that's what I think about it. We should be enhancing light in the evening, even though people will say, I have more fun going out at night than early in the morning. You're doing that at the expense of letting your rhythms shift later. And the result there is a desynchronization with the solar cycle outdoors. And we are in best shape when we're synchronized with day and night. So that early morning light should be set year round. Standard time is what we need.
Well, I'm going to take that advice, and I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. every morning from now on. That's going to be my goal. Thank you so much to Christina Cipriano of the Yale Child Study Center, Michael Terman, president of the Center of Environmental Therapeutics, and conscious sex and relationship coach Joe Portia Mayari. That brings us to the end of our program. A big thank you to Verizon for its support, and to all of the attendees for those who have missed any of the program this afternoon. We will have video from the event up on our website shortly. I'm Julia Manchester. Have a wonderful rest of your day.